data stream from PS12.
Where is she?
Right above Sector 14.
What is it, Sebastian?
I just want to show them that their dad wasn't always so boring.
Smile. There you go.
The smooth side is the definitive illusion.
I think your experts are right.
Which one?
All of them.
Meaning what exactly?
This peer.
Find another guy.
Strange photons, electrons from the sun, being reflected by the Earth's magnetic field as the solar radiation still.
Some films feel like they were carved out of darkness, not written onto a page, but discovered somewhere beneath the ice, waiting for someone curious enough to dig today. Welcome to the Cineflux, where we do not just talk about movies as entertainment, but as experiences that stay with us in strange and unexpected ways. And today, we are stepping into a film that lives in a very particular corner of cinema history, a place where childhood imagination, comic book mythology, studio ambition, creature design, and pure monster movie instinct all collide under the surface of the earth. Alien vs. Predator is not a film that asks to be approached quietly. Its title alone is almost a promise made to the inner teenager in all of us. It says two legends are about to meet. It says the shadows will have teeth. It says the hunt will become a ritual and the ancient fear of what waits in the dark will be given two very different faces. But here is what I keep returning to with this film. Beneath all the franchise machinery, beneath the crossover excitement, beneath the cold corridors, ancient temples, and monstrous silhouettes, there is something strangely sincere about it. It may not be the most elegant film in either legacy, it may not reach the philosophical terror of Alien or the primal jungle tension of Predator, but it understands the appeal of myth. It understands that monsters become powerful when they feel older than the story around them. And it understands that sometimes cinema gives us a cave, a door, a warning carved into stone, and simply asks, would you still go inside? That question is the emotional doorway into this essay, because Alien vs. Predator is, in many ways, a film about curiosity becoming danger. It begins with discovery, with science, with money, with ambition, with the human belief that anything buried can be owned once it is found. And then it slowly reminds us that some places are not waiting to be discovered, some places are waiting to be respected, some doors do not open into knowledge, they open into consequences. And maybe that is why this film still has a strange pull. Not because every character is deeply written, not because every scene lands with perfect weight, not because the story is flawless, but because the idea is so elemental. Humans enter a buried world, predators arrive for a sacred hunt, aliens awaken like a nightmare that refuses to stay extinct. And suddenly, humanity is no longer the center of the film. We are the interruption. Think about what that means. So much of cinema is built around human importance. Our choices, our desires, our courage, our mistakes. But creature cinema often becomes powerful when it reminds us of our smallness, when it strips away control, when it places us inside a system that existed before us and will continue after. In Alien vs. Predator, the pyramid beneath the ice is not just a location, it is a machine of ritual, a trap, a memory, a stage for a conflict older than the people who accidentally awaken it. That is the part of the film I want to sit with today. Not only whether it works as a crossover, not only whether the action satisfies, not only whether it honors the words it borrows from, but what it reveals about the dream of combining two cinematic monsters and asking them to share one mythology. Because the alien and the predator are not the same kind of fear. The alien is invasion. It is the terror of the body being violated, of evolution without mercy, of nature turned into something perfect and inhuman. It moves like a nightmare given biology. The predator is ritual. It is violence shaped into code, a hunter who turns danger into ceremony, who sees worth in challenge and shame in weakness. One is a force of uncontrolled birth. The other is discipline sharpened into violence. Put them together, and the film becomes more than a fight. It becomes a collision between chaos and order. And in the middle of that collision, there is us. That is where the cineflux begins today. Not with mockery, not with nostalgia alone, and not with the easy question of whether this film deserved better or worse than it received. We begin with the feeling of watching it, the strange pleasure of its premise, the cold beauty of its setting, the limits of its storytelling, and the mythology it tries to build from two very different cinematic bloodlines. If you came to this film as a fan, you probably came with expectations already burning in your mind. You wanted scale, you wanted creature design, you wanted the first true meeting to feel like an event. You wanted the movie to understand why these icons mattered before putting them in the same frame. And if you came to it later, maybe after hearing years of divided opinions, you may have found something more complicated. Not a masterpiece, but not nothing either. A film with flaws you can see clearly, and yet an atmosphere you may still remember. That is often where interesting cinema lives, not only in perfection but in tension, in the gap between what a movie attempts and what it achieves, in the distance between the film we imagined and the film that exists. Alien vs. Predator lives almost entirely inside that gap. So today we are going to move through it with patience. We will look at the world that created it, the legacy it inherited, the experience it offers, where it succeeds, where it struggles, and why, even with its limitations, it still feels like a fascinating artifact from a specific moment in blockbuster cinema. Because sometimes a film does not need to be great to be worth understanding. Sometimes it only needs to open a door beneath the ice. To understand Alien vs. Predator, you have to go back to a moment when blockbuster cinema was still learning how to live with its own mythology. The early 2000s were a strange and fascinating time for franchise filmmaking. Studios were beginning to understand that familiar names were not just stories anymore. They were worlds, they were libraries of imagery, creatures, rules, weapons, logos, and emotional associations. A film title could arrive with decades of memory already attached to it. You did not need to explain what an alien was. You did not need to explain what a predator meant. The audience carried those meanings into the theater before the first frame appeared. And that is exactly what made Alien vs. Predator feel both exciting and dangerous. Because this was not simply a new monster movie, it was a meeting point between two cinematic bloodlines that had already earned very different kinds of respect. Alien had begun as a haunted house film in space, but beneath that surface it was art horror, industrial, intimate, and deeply unsettling. It made the future feel damp, metallic, lonely, and unsafe. Predator, on the other hand, came from a more muscular cinematic tradition. It was survival cinema, jungle warfare transformed into myth, a human body pushed against something faster, older, and more technologically advanced. By 2004, both franchises had already changed shape several times. Alien had moved from Ridley Scott's cold cosmic terror to James Cameron's militarized nightmare, then into stranger, more divisive territory. Predator had gone from jungle simplicity to urban expansion, proving that its central idea could survive outside the original setting. But both franchises were also carrying the weight of expectation. They were famous but no longer untouched. They had sequels, comics, video games, sandwiches, and years of imagined possibilities surrounding them. And somewhere inside that fan imagination, the crossover had already happened long before the movie arrived. That matters. Alien vs. Predator was not born only from a studio pitch. It came from a pop culture conversation that had been building for years. Comic books, games, toys, and fun speculation had already turned the idea into a kind of modern monster myth. The question was not simply could these creatures share a story? The question was what would happen when cinema finally made visible what fans had already been imagining. That's a heavy promise for any film to carry, because when a crossover exists in imagination, it can be perfect. You can picture the ideal version. You can choose the tone, the violence, the setting, the scale. You can imagine the first meeting between the creatures exactly the way you want it. But once the film exists, it becomes specific. It has a rating, it has a budget, it has a runtime, it has studio restrictions, character choices, dialogue pacing, and compromises. The dream becomes a product, and the product has to survive the dream. Here is the thing about this film's cultural moment. Audiences were ready for event cinema, but event cinema had not yet become the endless cinematic universe machine we know now. Crossover still felt rare enough to be surprising. The idea of two established franchises colliding carried a kind of playground electricity. It was the kind of concept people could understand instantly. You did not need a long explanation. 3 words were enough. Alien versus Predator. That simplicity was powerful. But simplicity can also become a trap because the title promises confrontation. But cinema needs more than confrontation. It needs rhythm. It needs emotional entry. It needs a reason for the meeting to matter beyond the surface thrill, and that is where Alien vs. Predator entered a difficult space. It had to satisfy fans who wanted mythological weight, casual viewers who wanted a clean monster movie, studio expectations that wanted accessibility, and franchise history that demanded respect. That is almost impossible to balance perfectly. When the film arrived, the critical response was largely cool. Many critics saw it as too restrained, too mechanical, too far removed from the atmospheric power of Alien and the raw suspense of Predator. For people who loved those earlier films as serious genre achievements, this crossover could feel lighter, safer, and less dangerous than it should have been. It did not have the slow dread of the Nostromo. It did not have the savage clarity of the jungle hunt. It had the architecture of a myth, but not always the soul of one. And yet the audience reaction was more complicated than simple rejection. Because for many people, especially younger fans, Alien vs. Predator was an entry point. It was the first time they saw these creatures not as isolated legends from older films, but as living icons in direct conflict. There is a generation that discovered the alien and predator mythologies through this movie, through cable broadcasts, DVDs, games, posters, and late night rewatching, and that matters too. Cinema history is not only written by critics, it is also written by the people who keep returning to a film when no one is asking them to. This is why the film's afterlife is interesting. Over time, Alien vs. Predator became less of a failed promise and more of a fascinating artifact. People still argue about it, but the argument has softened. You can see its flaws clearly now. You can also see what it was trying to do. It wanted to make the conflict ancient. It wanted to connect human civilization to a secret ritual. It wanted to turn the predator not merely into a killer, but into a participant in something sacred and brutal. It wanted the alien to feel like a weapon, a play, and a test all at once. Those ideas are not small. The early 2000s also shaped how the film looked and molded. This was an era fascinated by underground spaces, secret histories, hidden civilizations, and ancient technology. Adventure cinema and horror cinema were often blending archaeology with danger. The idea that something vast and terrifying might be buried beneath the modern world had a strong cinematic pull. It speaks to a very human anxiety that history is not dead, only covered. That beneath the clean surfaces of the pleasant older systems are still waiting. Alien vs. Predator uses that anxiety directly. The setting beneath Antarctica is not just a cool backdrop. It turns the Earth itself into a siege container. Ice becomes a lid over the past. The pyramid becomes a wound in history. The deeper the characters go, the less modern the world feels. Their equipment, money, expertise, and confidence begin to look fragile against something designed by a logic older than them. That is where the film's cultural meaning becomes more interesting than its reputation. It arrived in an age of corporate exploration, technological confidence, and franchise expansion, and inside the story, a billionaire industrial figure gathers specialists to investigate a hidden structure, convinced that discovery is automatically progress. But the film quietly pushes against that idea. It suggests that knowledge without humility is dangerous. It suggests that the urge to possess the unknown can awaken forces no one is prepared to understand. It suggests that human ambition often mistakes access for mastery. Think about it this way: the humans do not create the central conflict, they interrupt it. They walk into someone else's ritual and assume they are the main characters. That may be the most honest thing the film says, and in a broader sense, that is how the movie itself entered cinema. It walked into two massive legacies and tried to build a new chamber between them. Some people saw the chamber as too polished, too simplified, too careful. Others found it atmospheric, entertaining, and unexpectedly rewatchable. But either way, Alien vs. Predator belongs to that rare category of films whose idea is almost bigger than the execution. You can criticize the final result and still understand why the concept refuses to die. Awards were never really the world this film was built for. It was not designed to be honored in quiet ceremonies. It was designed to activate memory, curiosity, and spectacle. But that does not mean it should be dismissed as empty. Genre cinema often hides its meaning inside surfaces people underestimate. A monster design can carry philosophy, a temple layout can carry theme, a fight can become a conversation between two forms of fear. And Alien vs. Predator, at its best, understands that. It may be perfectly of its time in its editing, its rating choices, its dialogue style, and its studio era caution. But its central image remains strangely timeless: human beings descending into a buried place where two nightmares have been waiting longer than our history can measure. That image still works, because every generation has its own version of the same fear: that the world is older than our control, that the darkness beneath us is not empty, that the past has teeth. Alien vs. Predator, released in 2004, was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, a filmmaker often drawn to contained spaces, survival structures, game-like tension, and worlds where human bodies move through systems designed to test them. And that matters here, because this film is not built like a slow philosophical descent in the way Alien was, and it is not built like a stripped-down survival duel in the way Predator was. It is built like a chamber beast inside a mythological machine. At its surface, this is a science fiction horror action film, but at its heart, it is something older and simpler. It is a forbidden tempo story. A group of human beings follows a signal into a place they do not understand, and once inside, the rules of the modern world stop applying. Money does not matter. Academic knowledge does not matter enough. Weapons do not matter in the way people expect them to. The deeper they go, the more the film becomes about entering a ritual without knowing the language of that ritual. The story follows Alexa Woods, played by Sanaa Lathan, a survival expert who is brought into an expedition because she understands what hostile environments can do to the human mind and body. That choice is important because Lex is not framed as someone fascinated by glory. She is careful, practical, grounded. She respects danger before she understands it. In a film filled with people eager to uncover something historic, she becomes the one character who seems to understand that survival often begins with humility. Around her, the expedition is assembled by Charles Bishop Wayland, played by Lance Henriksen, whose presence carries a quiet echo for anyone who knows the Alien films. It is not just casting, it is franchise memory placed inside the story like a ghost. Henriksen's face already belongs to this universe in a strange way, so when he appears here as the human founder behind a corporate legacy, the film creates a bridge between myth and timeline, between human ambition and the cold machinery that will one day define so much of the alien world. Laul Bova plays Sebastian, an archaeologist whose understanding of ancient cultures becomes one of the film's main keys. Ewan Bremner brings a softer, more anxious humanity as Graham Miller, while Colin Salmon's Maxwell Stafford gives the expedition a colder, professional edge. These are not characters written with the depth of a slow drama. There are tides, yes, but in this kind of story, tides can still function if they help shape the emotional map. The believer, the scientist, the soldier, the guide, the financier, the person who feels fear early enough to seem wise, and then there are the true icons of the film. The predators arrive not as random attackers, but as participants in an old trio. They are hunters stepping into a rite of passage, and that idea gives them a different energy from the lone hunter of the original Predator. They're not simply stalking prey for sport, they are proving themselves. The film gives their violence a structure, a code, and a relationship to history. Whether that structure is fully explored is another question, but the concept is strong. It turns the predator mythology to art ceremony. The alien, by contrast, enters the film as pure biological nightmare. It does not care about honor. It does not recognize ritual. It does not negotiate meaning. It spreads. It adapts. It turns every enclosed space into a place of birth, pursuit, and panic. If the predator represents a culture of controlled violence, the alien represents violence without culture. That contrast is the engine of the movie, and the world they inhabit is one of the film's best ideas. An ancient pyramid buried beneath the Antarctic ice, a structure that seems to combine architectural echoes of several civilizations into one impossible design. It is not realistic in a strict historical sense, but it works as pulp mythology. It suggests that human civilization may have been shaped by contact with something older and more dangerous than we ever imagined. The pyramid becomes a crossroads between archaeology, science fiction, and horror. Spoiler free, the question becomes simple: should you watch Alien vs Predator? I think the answer depends on what you are asking from it. If you want the spiritual terror and patient dread of Alien, this film will feel too clean, too fast, and too focused on mechanics. If you want the raw suspense and physical intensity of Predator, you may feel the human conflict is too thin and the danger too arranged. But if you come to it as a gothic creature crossover, as a dark adventure film beneath the ice, as a myth-building experiment that tries to place two legendary monsters into one ancient ritual, there is genuine pleasure here. What struck me most is that the film is often more interesting in concept than in character, but that concept has real atmosphere. The cold setting, the barred architecture, the shifting pyramid, the sense of humans trapped between two non-human systems, all of it creates a mood that stays longer than some of the dialogue does. This is not the strongest film in either franchise, but it is a fascinating meeting point, and cinema rarely tries what this film attempts to take two very different nightmares, place them inside one secret history, and ask whether human beings are brave enough or foolish enough to stand between them. When I first started with this film, I expected the obvious pleasures. I expected the cold corridors. I expected the creatures. I expected the slow reveal of claws, masks, acid movement in the dark. I expected the film to work like a cinematic arena, where two legends would finally be placed across from each other and the audience would simply wait for impact. And to be honest, part of the appeal of Alien vs. Predator is exactly that simple. There is a childlike excitement built into the premise, the kind of excitement that does not need to apologize for itself. But what surprised me, especially on returning to it, was how much the beginning tries to create patience before the chaos begins. The opening does not immediately throw us into the full collision. It begins with distance, ice, technology, a heat bloom beneath a frozen continent, a signal where nothing should be alive. There is something clean and airy about that image. The modern world looking down at the ancient world through machines, sensing warmth under a place defined by cold. That contrast gives the film its first emotional pulse. Something impossible is breathing beneath the ice, and that is where the atmosphere begins to work. Antarctica gives the film a very particular feeling. It is not the haunted industrial loneliness of deep space, and it is not the sweaty green muscular danger of the jungle. It is white emptiness, isolation without texture, a place where human presence already feels like an intrusion before the characters even descend into the pyramid. The landscape tells us that rescue is not close, comfort is not available, and the world above them is almost as indifferent as the monsters below. That first feeling matters because Alien vs. Predator is strongest when it allows the setting to create unease before the creatures do. The expedition has that classic genre shape, a group of skilled people gathered by wealth and curiosity, each bringing a reason to enter a place that should probably be left alone. And even if the characters are not all deeply developed, the movement of the group has a familiar pull. You understand the temptation, a structure older than known civilization, a discovery that could change history, a mystery so large that caution begins to feel like cowardice. This is how many horror stories begin, not with even, but with fascination. What struck me most is that the film understands the seductive danger of discovery. It does not present the descent as foolish immediately, it lets you feel why these people would go down. The pyramid is not only a threat, it is a question, and human beings are not good at walking away from questions that feel like they could rewrite the world. Lex is important here because she brings resistance into that excitement. She does not want to rush blindly. She reads the environment before she reads the mystery. She feels the risk in the journey itself, not just in what waits at the destination. And that gives the early scenes a useful tension. Around her are people who see history, profit, proof, legacy, and achievement. She sees weather, distance, instability, and death. In a film about ancient rituals and cosmic monsters, her practicality becomes strangely emotional. Because survival is not just physical, it is a way of seeing clearly. The opening stretch also has a kind of early 2000s adventure horror rhythm that feels very specific now. The technology, the team assembly, the corporate funding, the archaeological excitement, the clean digital displays, the dramatic discovery beneath the earth, all of it belongs to a particular era of genre cinema, and depending on your taste, that can feel dated or charming. For me, it gives the film a certain texture. It feels like a time capsule from an age when studios were trying to make monster mythology feel sleek, accessible, and global. Then the pyramid appears and the film begins to change. There is a genuine thrill in that first encounter with the structure. Not because it is believable in a scholarly way, but because it operates on dream logic. It feels like something imagined by a culture that never existed, built out of the echoes of cultures that did. The film uses that impossibility to create mythic weight. You are not meant to inspect it like a historian. You are meant to feel the absurd grandeur of it. A temple beneath Antarctica, a maze that rearranges itself, a ritual chamber waiting for a hunt. And for a while, that is enough. The first time watching, I remember feeling that the film had found a promising doorway. The pieces were there, a hostile environment, a buried secret, a group of humans who slowly realize they are not explorers but participants, a predator mythology expanded into ceremony, an alien presence waiting to turn architecture into a nest. The film begins with the feeling that everything is moving towards something ancient and inevitable. But even early on, you can feel the tension between atmosphere and simplicity. The mood wants to be heavy, the premise wants to be mythic, the characters, however, are often written in broad strokes, so the first experience of the film becomes double sided. One part of you is drawn into the core beauty of the setting and the promise of the mythology. Another part of you senses that the human drama may not be strong enough to carry the weight of everything around it, and yet that does not kill the experience. Because Alien vs. Predator is not built primarily around intimacy, it is built around anticipation. It is a film that asks you to lean forward, not because you deeply know every person in the expedition, but because the space itself keeps tightening. Every door, every carving, every chamber feels like it has been waiting for this exact mistake. That is the emotional hook of the first viewing. Not fear in its purest form, not awe in its richest form, but curiosity turning into dread one step at a time. The story of Alien vs. Predator begins with a signal, and that is important because signals in science fiction are rarely just information. They are invitations, they are temptations. They are the universe whispering to human curiosity and asking whether we are wise enough to ignore what we do not understand. A heat signature appears beneath the ice of Antarctica, impossible and precise, like something ancient has briefly exhaled under the colder skin of the earth. From above, it looks almost clinical, data on a screen, a shape discovered by technology, a mystery made visible through machines, but emotionally it feels older than science. It feels like a door being noticed by people who do not yet know it was never meant for them. That is where Charles Bishop Wayland enters the story, not as a villain in the simple sense, but as a man racing against his own limits. He is wealthy, powerful, and surrounded by people who can make impossible expeditions happen quickly. Yet beneath that control is mortality. There is something fragile behind his ambition. He wants discovery, yes, but he also wants legacy. He wants to leave behind proof that his life reached beyond business and into history. This is one of the film's more interesting emotional ideas, even if it does not explore it as deeply as it could. Wayland is not just funding an expedition because something strange has been found. He is drawn to the possibility that beneath the ice there may be something large enough to outlive him, and that gives his choices a quiet sadness. He mistakes the scale of the discovery for meaning. He believes that if he can stand before something ancient, he can somehow become part of it. Think about what that means. So much of human ambition is really a conversation with death. We build, explore, name, document, and possess because some part of us cannot accept being temporary. Wayland looks at the impossible structure beneath Antarctica and sees not only mystery, but a chance to matter permanently. That is the emotional flaw that opens the door. Then the team gathers. Lex joins as a person who understands survival better than spectacle. She is not seduced easily by the romance of discovery. From the beginning, she carries a different rhythm from everyone around her. The others are pulled forward by history, money, science, or duty. Lex is pulled backward by caution. She knows that hostile environments punish arrogance. She knows that nature does not care how important your mission feels. And that makes her presence essential because the entire story is about people walking into a system they have mistaken for a site. The journey to Antarctica has a clean adventure energy at first. The team arrives at the edge of the world, surrounded by white emptiness, and the film gives you the feeling that civilization has already been left behind. There are no crowds here, no cities, no everyday life. Only machines, wind, ice, and the thin confidence of people who believe preparation can protect them from the unknown. But before they truly enter the pyramid, the film introduces one of its strongest visual ideas, the tunnel. A passage has been cut through the ice with impossible speed, descending toward the buried structure like a wound. It is too perfect, too direct, too recent. The humans see it as access, but as an image it feels more like permission granted by something else. It is as if the world below has made room for them, not because it welcomes them, but because their presence is required. That is where the story begins to become more than an expedition. The team descends and the modern world starts to shrink. The further they move downward, the less their expedition seems to matter. Their lights push against darkness but never defeat it. Their radios, weapons, maps, and tools give them the illusion of control, while the architecture around them quietly prepares to remove that illusion. The pyramid is waiting with its own rules. And here is the thing about this film's story: it works best when the humans are not driving the plot but being absorbed by it. They enter the structure believing they are investigators. But the pyramid does not behave like a ruin, it behaves like a living system. Chambers shift, doors close, pathways change. The place is not passive. It rearranges human certainty into confusion. Every choice the team makes becomes part of a design they do not understand. They are not simply lost inside a building, they are inside a ritual mechanism. That is a very strong story engine. The first emotional turn comes when archaeology gives way to warning. The carvings and relics suggest a hidden history linking human civilization to the predators, not as random visitors, but as godlike figures who shaped ancient worship through fear and awe. The humans discovered that this place was once part temple, part training ground, part sacrificial machine, and suddenly the story becomes uncomfortable in a deeper way. What they have found is not just proof of extraterrestrial contact. It is proof that human history may contain ceremonies built around our own smallness. The film does not pause long enough to make that idea truly haunting, but the idea itself is powerful. Imagine discovering that the gods of old were not divine but hunters. Imagine learning that worship may have grown around beings who did not love humanity but used it. The pyramid turns civilization into a footprint left by something colder. It suggests that human culture may have been shaped not only by imagination and faith, but by terror misread as holiness. This is where Sebastian becomes less useful to the emotional movement of the story. He reads the symbols, pieces together the pattern, and begins to understand that the expedition is not uncovering a treasure, it is standing inside a cycle. That realization changes the energy of the film. The team is no longer moving toward discovery, they are catching up to a meaning that has already trapped them. Then the predators arrive. The arrival is not treated like an accident. They come with purpose, descending toward the same place with the certainty the humans lack. The film frames them as young hunters entering a trial, which gives their presence a ceremonial quality. They are dangerous, yes, but not chaotic. They belong to the structure in a way the humans do not. Their weapons, masks, and movements feel like extensions of a culture built around challenge, status, and proof. This changes the emotional geometry of the film. At first, the threat seems to be the unknown below. Then it becomes clear that another force has arrived from above, one that understands the pyramid and has returned to claim what was placed there. The humans are caught between ignorance and tradition, between the people who accidentally opened the game and the beings who gain to play it, and then the alien presence awakens. The film treats the alien less like a character and more like a biological consequence. Once released, it turns the environment against everyone. It does not care about the ritual. It does not care about honor. It does not care who began the cycle or why. It spreads through the pyramid with a terrifying simplicity. The predator may have rules, but the alien is what happens when life itself becomes weaponized. That contrast gives the middle of the story its real tension. The predators enter expecting a right. The humans enter expecting knowledge. The aliens enter as a force that makes both expectation and knowledge feel fragile. Suddenly, the pyramid is no longer only a ceremonial arena. It becomes an ecosystem of panic. Every chamber feels less like architecture and more like a throat closing around the characters. The human group begins to break apart, not only physically but emotionally. This is where the film leans into survival horror. People who arrived with titles and expertise are reduced to instinct. The archaeologist, the technician, the armed support, the corporate figure, all those roles begin to meaningless. In the dark, identity becomes simple. You are either moving, hiding, helping, or already lost. What makes Lex stand out is that she adapts faster than the others. She does not cling to the original purpose of the mission once the truth becomes clear. This is one of the reasons she works as the center of the film. She is not the smartest because she knows the mythology immediately. She is the smartest because she lets reality change her priorities. Survival in this story belongs to the person willing to abandon the old story quickly enough. There is something quietly meaningful in that. Many characters in genre films suffer because they keep believing in the first version of the situation. They think they are still on a mission, still in control, still capable of returning to normal if they just solve the next problem. Lex understands that normal is gone. The pyramid is not a puzzle to complete, it is a place to escape. That clarity gives her character a grounded strength the film badly needs. As the story moves deeper, the predator mythology begins to shift too. At first, the predators are distant figures of threat, almost like armored shadows crossing through the human disaster. But the more the alien threat grows, the more complicated the predator role becomes. They are still dangerous, they are still responsible for the ritual, yet they are also not the same kind of horror as the creatures they hunt. The film slowly asks you to understand difference inside danger. That is one of the more interesting emotional turns in Alien vs. Predator. It does not make the predator good in a simple moral sense. Instead, it makes the predator legible. You begin to understand that beneath the mask is a code. A brutal code, yes, but a code. The alien cannot be reinvented because it is appetite and survival made perfect. The predator cannot be trusted in a human sense, but it can be understood through behavior. It recognizes strength, it recognizes courage, it recognizes the shape of a worthy opponent. This is where the film moves toward its central reversal. The humans began as explorers, then they became prey. But Lex slowly becomes something else, not a conqueror, not a chosen hero in the grand fantasy sense, but a survivor who earns recognition by seeing the situation clearly. She begins to understand that escape may not come from defeating everything, but from reading the hierarchy of danger correctly. In this buried world, survival depends on knowing which monster has rules. That idea gives the film its strongest character movement. Lex is not transformed because she becomes fearless. She is transformed because she learns how to act while afraid. The film does something simple but effective with her. It places her beside beings far stronger than she is, that lets her value come from judgment, nerve, and moral steadiness. She is physically outmatched by almost everything in the pyramid, but she does not collapse into helplessness. She keeps choosing. Meanwhile, the pyramid keeps tightening. The shift in structure turns time into pressure. The environment is no longer just a backdrop, but an active participant in the story. Characters are separated by walls, trapped by mechanisms, and forced into confrontations they cannot understand until it is too late. The place behaves like a clockwork nightmare. It does not chase anyone, but it still hunts by design. And what is fascinating is how the story gradually strips away human importance. The expedition's original purpose becomes almost irrelevant. The great discovery, the historical breakthrough, the promise of legacy, all of it burns away in the face of survival. Valen's ambition, Sebastian's knowledge, the team's equipment, the corporagency that brought them there, none of it can negotiate with the reality beneath the ice. That is the emotional experience of the story, the collapse of human framing. At first, this is a film about people discovering a pyramid, then it becomes a film about people discovering they were never the point. The pyramid was not waiting for historians, it was waiting for hunters, it was waiting for hosts, it was waiting for the ritual to begin again. And that is why the story, even when it moves quickly and simplifies certain characters, still has a mythic pull. It places human beings inside an ancient machine where every species has a role, but only one species does not know it. The predators know why they are there. The aliens fulfill their biological purpose without hesitation. Only the humans are confused enough to think discovery means control. By the time Lex begins to understand the shape of the conflict, the film has moved from expedition horror into survival alliance, from curiosity into consequence. The story is no longer asking what lies beneath the ice. It is asking what kind of intelligence, courage, and humility are required to leave that darkness alive. And here is where the film shifts completely. The making of Alien vs. Predator is almost as revealing as the film itself because this was never a simple case of placing two monsters in one movie and letting them collide. The project had to carry years of fan expectation, studio hesitation, franchise continuity, comic book inheritance, and practical creature history before a single character stepped into that pyramid. According to production history, the crossover idea had already been alive in comics and fan culture long before the 2004 film. The concept from the 1989 Aliens vs. Predator comic line was teased visually through the Alien Sculling Predator 2 and passed through early screenplay attempts in the 1990s before the studio finally moved forward years later. And that changes how you look at the finished film. It was not simply inventing a meeting, it was trying to give physical form to an idea that fans had been carrying in their imagination for more than a decade. That kind of expectation is powerful, but it is also dangerous. A film made from a long standing fan dream has to compete with the perfect version that already exists inside everyone's head. So when Paul W.S. Anderson came in with his version, the key choice was not just who wins the fight, the key choice was context. Why are they together? Why here? Why now? What kind of myth can hold both creatures without making either one feel like a guest in the wrong universe? Reportedly, Anderson had worked on his story idea for years, drawing from the Machiko Noguchi material from the expanded Alien vs. Predator world, while Shane Solano later co-wrote the shooting script. That background matters because you can feel the film reaching toward the idea of a human survivor entering a predator ritual and becoming recognized by that culture. Lex is not exactly the same figure as Machiko, but the emotional shape is related. A human being caught between species, forced to survive by understanding the code of the hunters. The setting was one of Anderson's most important creative decisions. Instead of placing the alien outbreak in a modern city and breaking the future continuity of the alien films, he chose an isolated Antarctic location, specifically a remote, hostile environment where the truth could remain buried. That decision reshapes the film's entire identity. It gives the story secrecy. It allows the mythology to happen in a sealed space. And emotionally, it means the characters are not just trapped underground, they are trapped outside history, in a place where no one can easily witness what happens. The ancient astronaut mythology also came from a very specific imaginative direction. Anderson's story drew on ideas about ancient civilizations, pyramids, and alien influence, while also taking inspiration from the atmosphere of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. You can see that influence most clearly in the feeling of Antarctica as a place where discovery becomes cosmic unease. The film is not Lovecraftian in its deepest philosophical sense, but it borrows that image of scholars and explorers finding something buried beneath the ice that makes human history feel smaller than it wants to be. And then comes the physical making of the world. The production took place largely in the Czech Republic, with the Czech Film Commission listing Prague locations including Barrandov Studios and the CKD factory in Vysočany for the 2003 shoot. According to production accounts, Barrandov became the home of many of the film's life-size sets, especially the pyramid interiors. That is important because Alien vs. Predator often works best when it feels like the actors are inside something real. The stone corridors, the ritual chamber, the heavy doors, the carved walls, they give the performers a physical pressure to respond to. You can feel that in the way the characters move. They are not drifting through empty digital space. They are turning corners, touching walls, stepping through narrow passages, and reacting to architecture that has weight. Even when the writing is simple, the sets help create belief. The pyramid feels less like a background and more like a machine surrounding them. Production sources note that the pyramid design pulled from Egyptian, Cambodian, and Aztec influences, and that the shifting rooms were meant to create claustrophobia. That detail is fascinating because it explains why the pyramid feels culturally impossible by design. It is not trying to be one civilization, it is trying to feel like the hidden root beneath many civilizations. It becomes a visual argument. Maybe the patterns humans thought were separate were all shadows of the same terrifying encounter. The film also leaned heavily on miniatures and practical construction. Reports describe third-scale miniatures, large whaling station models, and icebreaker miniature with working details and huge amounts of artificial snow used for the exterior environment. That practical texture matters. It gives the cold world above the pyramid a tactile quality. Even when you know you are watching the studio-built illusion, the eye senses material. Snow sits on surfaces, light hits miniature metal, the icebreaker feels like an object, not only an idea. And then there are the creatures. Amalgamated Dynamics Inc., the effects company founded by Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr., handled creature work on the film, continuing a relationship with the Alien franchise that included Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection. Production accounts also note a mixture of creature suits, puppetry, hydraulics, miniatures, and visual effect shots, including a hydraulic alien used for several scenes and operated by multiple people. This is one of the reasons the film still has a physical appeal. The monsters do not always feel distant from the actors, often they feel present in the room. Tom Woodruff Jr. has spoken more broadly about the hardship and value of performing inside the xenomorph suit, emphasizing that audiences can feel when a creature has a tangible presence in the space. That idea is central to why these monsters endure. A creature is not only design, it is movement, posture, weight, stillness, breath, and the strange human discipline required to make something inhuman feel alive. So when you revisit Alien vs. Predator, the making of it reveals a film built out of competing instincts. It wants to be sleek, but it also wants stone and slime and snow. It wants to be a studio crossover, but it also wants ritual. It wants accessibility, but it is carrying decades of monster history on its back. That tension is visible in every film, and maybe that is why the film still feels interesting. It is not only a product of franchise calculation, it is also a very physical attempt to build a temple where two nightmares can meet. What Alien vs. Predator achieves best is not emotional complexity in the traditional sense. It does not give us long private scenes where characters confess hidden wounds, and it does not slow down enough to let every human life become deeply personal. Its achievement is more architectural, more atmospheric, more mythic. It builds a space where two different nightmares can feel like they belong to the same hidden history. That is not easy, because the alien and the predator come from very different cinematic languages. The alien belongs to dread, violation, darkness, and the fear that life itself can become hostile. The predator belongs to pursuit, hierarchy, ritual, and the terror of being measured by something stronger than you. If a film places them together carelessly, one can easily weaken the other. The alien can become just another creature to be fought. The predator can become just another monster in the hallway. But at its best, Alien vs. Predator avoids that by giving each creature a different meaning inside the same story. The alien is treated as outbreak. It is the thing that escapes purpose. Even when other beings try to use it as part of a ritual, it does not feel obedient. It grows beyond structure. It turns the pyramid against everyone, not because it understands the architecture, but because it converts any environment into a nest, a maze, a hunting ground. The film understands that the alien is terrifying because it does not need a philosophy, it only needs opportunity. The predator, by contrast, is given ceremony. The film frames predator violence as something bound to tradition, status, and testing. That does not make it moral in a human way, but it does make it readable. You can feel the rules even before they are fully explained. The masks, the weapons, the gestures, the way the hunters move through the pyramid, all of it suggests culture. Brutal culture, yes, but culture nonetheless, and this contrast becomes the film's strongest conceptual success. Chaos against code, biology against ritual, infection against initiation. The alien takes space. The predator earns status. One spreads through instinct, the other moves through discipline. The human characters survive only when they begin to understand the difference. Sanaa Lathan's Alexa Woods is central to whatever emotional strength the film has. Lex is not written as a loud action hero, and that works in her favor. She is observant before she is heroic. Her authority comes from grounded judgment, not from speeches or exaggerated toughness. She listens to danger, she respects the environment, She knows that survival begins before the first attack, in the small decisions people make while they still believe they have time. There is one airy quality in her performance that proves the character completely. She keeps watching the conditions around her while everyone else watches the mystery. That may sound simple, but it gives Lex a believable center. She is surrounded by people chasing discovery, but she is reading risk. Her eyes are often measuring distance, weather, structure, timing, and fear. Lathan plays her with a kind of quiet refusal to be impressed by danger just because it is extraordinary. That is why Lex becomes the light human center for this story. She is not trying to dominate the mythology, she is trying to survive contact with it. And in a film where humanity is constantly being humbled, that humility becomes strength. Lance Henriksen brings something different as Valiant. His performance carries a sadness that the script only partially explores, but his presence gives the film texture. Wayland could have been written only as the wealthy man whose ambition puts everyone at risk. Instead, Henriksen gives him a physical vulnerability, a sense that the expedition is not just corporate arrogance, but a final attempt to make his life echo beyond itself. He is chasing history because his own time is running out. That does not excuse the danger he creates, but it makes the danger more human. He is not only greedy, he is afraid of disappearing, and that fear connects him to one of the oldest human impulses, the desire to leave a mark on a world that will eventually continue without us. The supporting characters are thinner, but they still help the film's machinery. Sebastian gives the mythology a human translator. Mira gives the expedition a softer edge of fear and ordinary vulnerability. Stafford represents the professional confidence that begins to look increasingly useless once the pyramid reveals its real purpose. The film does not deepen them enough for every loss to carry full emotional weight, but each one contributes to the feeling of a team being slowly reduced from specialists into survivors. The writing is functional more than poetic, but it does have one clever structural idea. It turns exposition into survival knowledge. The more the characters learn about the pyramid, the more dangerous their situation becomes. Information does not simply explain the plot, it changes what the characters must do. The carvings, the history, the shifting structure, the relationship between hunters and creatures, these details all become instructions written too late. That is a useful screenplay rhythm. Discovery becomes dread, understanding becomes pressure. The truth does not save them automatically, it only tells them how trapped they really are. Visually, the film achieves a mode that is often stronger than its characterization. The contrast between Antarctica and the pyramid is simple but effective. Above ground, the world is open, white, empty, and brutally cold. Below ground, everything is enclosed, dark, carved, and ritualistic. The film moves from blankness into pattern, from ice into stone, from scientific distance into mythic confinement. The pyramid itself is the visual heart of the movie. Its walls carry the feeling of a secret too old to belong to one culture. Its corridors are narrow enough to create pressure, but large enough to suggest ceremony. The chambers feel designed not for comfort but for testing, and the shifting architecture gives the film one of its best recurring ideas. The environment does not simply contain the story, it participates in it. That is where Anderson's direction is most effective. He understands the pleasure of a trap with rules. He frames the pyramid like a puzzle box built by something inhumanly patient. Doors close with purpose, corridors rearrange like a decision has been made. Characters are forced into new configurations not by choice but by design. The film becomes a moving board, and every species inside it is at peace with a different understanding of the game. The creature design also carries real weight. The predators have a heavy armored presence, almost like ancient warriors filtered through science fiction. Their silhouettes are readable even in darkness. Broad shoulders, masks, blades, technology worn like sacred equipment. They feel ceremonial before they feel futuristic. That is important because it keeps them from becoming only alien soldiers. They are hunters with heritage. The aliens remain effective because their design still resists comfort. Even when the film shows more of them than the original Alien would have, Their bodies still feel wrong in a way that cinema rarely improves upon. Smooth and skeletal, insect-like and almost mechanical, they seem built from contradictions. They are elegant and repulsive, beautiful and unbearable. Familiar now, maybe, but still powerful when framed as movement in shadow. The score and sound design help hold the film together. Arult Closer's music does not redefine either franchise, but it gives the story a large, ceremonial pulse when the mythology rises. The drum's low tones and dramatic swells push the film toward adventure horror rather than pure terror. That choice may disappoint anyone wanting deeper dread, but it fits this version of the story. This is not only a haunted house film, it is a trial beneath earth. Sound matters even more in the quieter moments. The pyramid has its own voice, stone mechanisms, distant movement, air inside seams chambers, the wet and sharp textures of creature presence. Silence becomes useful because it reminds you how far the characters are from the human world. When the film lets the soundscape breathe, you feel the isolation more clearly. There is no city outside the wall, no ordinary life nearby, only ice above and something ancient below. And this is the part I keep coming back to. Alien versus Predator achieves a sense of scale without always needing huge spectacle. Its scale is historical, not just physical. The idea that these hunts have happened before, that civilizations may have been shaped by them, that the pyramid is part of a cycle rather than a one-time event. All of this gives the film a mythic background larger than the runtime can fully explore. Maybe that is why the film remains watchable despite its flaws. It gives you enough atmosphere to imagine the deeper version. It opens enough doors for your mind to continue walking through them. It suggests a larger history in the margins, and sometimes suggestion is its own kind of power. Alien vs. Predator may not achieve greatness, but it achieves something that many cleaner, safer films do not. It creates an image you remember, a human survivor beneath the ice, standing between a creature of ritual and a creature of pure instinct, trying to lead the rules of a world where humanity was never meant to be central. That image has weight. And in genre cinema, a strong image can become its own form of immortality. What Alien vs. Predator communicates best without words is the feeling that the pyramid already knows more than the people inside it. That may sound strange, but stay with it. The film's quietest strength is not in what the characters explain about the ancient structure. It is in the way the structure feels before anyone fully understands it. The walls do not need to speak, the carvings do not need long speeches. The corridors, the chambers, the doors, the stone mechanisms, all of them create the sense of a place that has been waiting with terrible patience. There is a specific kind of silence in buried places. It is not peaceful silence, it is sealed silence. It feels like time has been pressed into the walls, and the pyramid carries that feeling. When the characters move through it, they are surrounded by a history that does not welcome them, and the film often becomes most effective when it lets that history remain partially unreadable. Because explanation can make fear smaller, the more completely a film explains a mystery, the more it risks turning awe into information. Alien vs. Predator has a lot of exposition, yes, but its strongest vision moments are the ones where the pyramid simply exists. A chamber opens, a wall shifts, a symbol catches the light, a passage becomes a prison. No one needs to say too much for you to understand the emotional truth. This place was built for something humans were never meant to control. That is where silence becomes language. The empty hallways communicate human smallness. The carved images communicate a history older than memory. The machinery communicates intention. And the darkness between rooms communicates something even more unsettling, that not every danger announces itself before it arrives. The predators also carry a language of silence. They are not verbal beings in the human dramatic sense. Their presence is communicated through posture, ritual, gesture, and stillness. A predator standing still can feel more expressive than a human explaining fear. The tilt of the head, the pause before action, the careful evaluation of a body in front of them, all of it suggests thought without making that thought familiar. This is important because the film does not ask us to understand the predator through emotion. It asks us to understand him through code. The silence around the predator is not emptiness. It is discipline. He watches before he acts, he measures before he attacks, he recognizes patterns in behavior. In those pauses, you feel the distance between human fear and predator judgment. The alien's silence is different. The alien does not feel disciplined, it feels hidden. Its silence is not ritualistic, it is predatory in a biological sense. It waits because waiting serves survival. It emerges from darkness not as a warrior choosing a moment, but as a living threat shaped by instinct. When the film holds on an empty space where an alien might be, that emptiness becomes active. You begin to search the frame, you begin to distrust corners, you begin to feel that the room itself may be concealing movement. That is a crucial difference. Predator silence feels like observation. Alien silence feels like impatience. And Lex exists between those two forms of quiet. One of the strongest things about her character is how much she listens to spaces. She is not always speaking, not always trying to dominate a room with certainty. She watches, she absorbs, she adjusts. In a film that could easily become only noise and impact, Lex's strength often comes from her ability to pause long enough to understand what others miss. Her silence is not weakness. It is awareness. Cinema rarely does this well in action horror because there is always the temptation to fill every moment with explanation or panic. But Alien vs. Predator is better when it trusts faces, corridors, movement, and distance. The film's most eloquent idea is not spoken as a line. It is felt in the image of a human being standing inside a ritual space, realizing that survival depends on understanding non-human roles. The film also uses omission in an interesting way. It does not show us the full history of every hunt. It does not show ancient ceremonies in exhaustive detail. It does not tell us every rule of predator culture. It gives us fragments, carvings, weapons, bodies, architecture, consequences. That restraint leaves room for imagination, and imagination is where monster mythology becomes powerful. A fully explained monster is often less frightening. A fully explained ritual can become ordinary, but a partially understood ritual remains alive in the mind. The pyramid silence says, "This has happened before." The predator silence says, "Prove your worth." The alien silence says nothing at all, and that is why it is terrifying. It does not need to communicate because it is not interested in being understood. What this film understands, even if imperfectly, is that monsters become iconic not only through appearance, but through the spaces around them. The quiet before they appear, the pause after they disappear, the empty frame that makes you lean closer, the sound that may be machinery or breath or something moving just beyond sight. In those moments, Alien vs. Predator becomes less about who wins a fight and more about what kind of fear each creature brings into silence. One silence judges, one silence judges, one silence waits. And the human silence between them is the sound of realizing we were never at the top of the story. Where Alien vs. Predator falls short is not in the strength of its idea. The idea is almost too strong. A buried pyramid beneath Antarctica, predators returning for an ancient rite, aliens used as the ultimate test, human beings entering the middle of a ritual they mistake for an archaeological discovery. These are rich pieces. You can feel the larger, stranger film hiding inside the one we received. The problem is that the film often moves too quickly past its own best possibilities. That is the first real wound. The mythology is fascinating, but it is rarely allowed to breathe for long. The pyramid suggests centuries of hidden contact, human worship, sacrifice, alien influence, and predator ritual that could have carried an entire film by itself. But because the movie also has to deliver the promised creature conflict, many of those ideas become fast explanations rather than haunting discoveries. You feel the difference. A story can tell you something ancient happened, or it can make you feel the weight of ancientness. Alien vs. Predator does both at times, but it relies too much on spoken explanation when atmosphere could have made the same ideas more powerful. The carvings, chambers, and rituals are visually strong enough to carry deeper dread. The film just does not always trust them. The human characters are the second weakness. Lex works because she has a clear survival identity, and Wayland has enough sadness to feel interesting. But many of the others are not developed beyond function. They are there to read symbols, carry equipment, provide security, react to danger, or become part of the pyramid's machinery that can work in a lean horror film. But here the world is so big that the people sometimes feel too small in the wrong way. There is a difference between human smallness as theme and human thinness as writing. The first can be powerful. The second limits emotional impact. When characters disappear, the film often gives us tension, but not always grief. We understand danger is increasing, yet we do not always feel the human cost as deeply as we should. And this matters because monster cinema becomes more frightening when life feels specific. The Alien was terrifying in its first film, partly because the crew felt worn, ordinary, and trapped in a believable working world. Predator worked because the group had physical chemistry and personality before being stripped down by fear. Alien vs. Predator has a team, but not enough texture inside that team. Pacing also creates a problem. The film wants to be a slow discovery story and a fast creature action film at the same time. In the first half, it builds toward mystery. In the second half, it begins rushing through consequence. Once the ritual fully begins, scenes sometimes feel designed to move pieces into position rather than explore the terror of being trapped in that impossible space. This is not a fatal flaw, but it's not as our limit. The theme's best version would have made every chamber feel like a moral and psychological pressure point. It would have let the expedition unravel more slowly. It would have allowed Lex to observe, fail, adapt, and understand the Predator codes through more gradual experience. Instead, some emotional transitions happen quickly because the film has to reach the alliance, the confrontation, and the ending within a tight runtime. The rating and tone also soften the danger. Alien and Predator both come from worlds where threat feels physically severe, where the body is fragile and fear is allowed to be ugly. Alien vs. Predator often feels cleaner than its own mythology. It wants horror imagery, but it also wants broad accessibility that creates a strange restraint. The film talks in the language of danger, but sometimes pulls back before danger can truly disturb us. And because of that, the aliens occasionally lose some of their sacred terror. They are still visually powerful. Their design still works. Their movement still creates fear. But when they are used mainly as opponents in action beats, they can become less mysterious. The original power of the alien came from unknowability, intimacy, and dread. Here, because there must be multiple creatures and multiple battles, the alien becomes more numerous and more manageable as a cinematic object. It becomes something the film needs to deploy, not something the film lets haunt every breath. The predators also suffer from compression. The concept of young hunters on a rite of passage is strong, but the film does not give each hunter enough personality or ritual distinction. Imagine if we understood their differences more clearly, one reckless, one disciplined, one uncertain, each responding to the trial in a different way. That would have made their losses and failures feel more meaningful. Instead, the film gives us the shape of a culture without fully letting us feel individual lives inside it. And then there is the central crossover problem. When two icons meet, the audience wants balance. Too much predator power, and the alien becomes abrupt. Too much alien dominance, and the predator loses its mystique. Alien versus predator mostly understands this balance, but not always. Some encounters feel thrilling because they show the contrast between ritual and instinct. Others feel staged because the movie is visibly managing franchise fairness. That is the difficult truth of crossover cinema. Sometimes you can feel the negotiation behind the image. Still, these flaws are not signs of laziness. They are signs of compression, caution, and competing obligations. The film is trying to be a monster movie, a franchise bridge, an ancient history adventure, a survival story, and a fan service event all at once. Some films can carry that much weight. This one carries pieces of it beautifully, but not the whole structure. Its flaws are real, but they are also revealing, because what hurts most about Alien vs. Predator is not that it has no imagination. It is that it has enough imagination to make you wish it had gone deeper. What Alien vs. Predator is really saying begins with a very simple human mistake. We think discovery gives us ownership. That is the emotional spine beneath the ice. The people in this film find a heat signature, a structure, a tunnel, a pyramid, a hidden history, and almost immediately the language around the discovery becomes the language of possession. We found it, we entered it, we will study it, we will explain it, we will bring back proof. The unknown becomes a price the moment human beings can measure it. But the film quietly pushes against that arrogance, because the pyramid was never empty, it was never forgotten, it was never waiting for human permission. It was part of a cycle, a ritual, a system of violence and status that existed outside modern understanding. The humans are not explorers entering a dead ruin. They are intruders entering an active machine, and that changes everything. At its deepest level, Alien vs. Predator is about the danger of entering old systems without understanding their rules. That can be read literally through the pyramid, the creatures, and the hunt. But it also has a larger emotional meaning. Human beings do this all the time. We walk into histories, cultures, technologies, environments, and forces we do not fully understand, then assume our confidence will protect us. We mistake access for wisdom. We mistake tools for mastery. We mistake speed for readiness. The film turns that mistake into a monster story. Wayland represents one side of that idea. He is not simply a man with money. He is a man trying to defeat his own impermanence through discovery. He wants the hidden world beneath the ice to become part of his legacy. That is why his ambition feels human even when it becomes dangerous. He is chasing something many people understand, the desire to matter before time runs out. But the tragedy is that the pyramid does not care about his legacy. It does not care about his name, his company, his wealth, his illness, or his need to be remembered. It reduces him to what every human becomes inside that place, a body in a ritual older than him. And there is something coldly honest about that. The universe does not always recognize the stories we tell about ourselves. Sometimes meaning is not granted just because we want it badly enough. Lex survives because she thinks differently. She does not enter the story trying to own the unknown. She enters with caution, respect, and a survival instinct shaped by humility. That is what the film understands about strength. Real strength is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to let fear give you accurate information. Lex is powerful because she listens when danger speaks. She changes when the situation changes. She does not cling to ego when ego becomes useless. In that sense, the film's deepest human theme is adaptability. The people who fail most severely are the ones who cannot let go of their first interpretation. They think they are on an expedition. They think they are making history. They think they are managing risk. But Lex slowly understands that the story has changed. She accepts the truth faster than everyone else. This is no longer about discovery. This is about survival inside someone else's world. That is a meaningful idea because life often humbles us in the same way, though not with pyramids and creatures beneath Antarctica. We enter situations believing we understand the rules, and then reality corrects us. A crisis arrives, a relationship changes, a dream collapses. A system reveals itself as larger and colder than we imagined. The people who survive emotionally are often not the people who had the strongest original plan. They are the people who can release their own plan in time. Alien vs. Predator also speaks through the contrast between its two monsters. The alien is the fear of life without mercy. It is birth, hunger, adaptation, and survival, stripped of tenderness. It does not hate. It does not judge. It does not choose evil. That is what makes it unsettling. It is not morally corrupt. It is biologically perfect in a way that leaves no room for human comfort. It reminds us that nature, when imagined without softness, can become terrifying. The predator is the fear of being measured. It watches, it evaluates, it decides whether a living thing is worthy of the hunt. That fear is different from being consumed. It is the fear of judgment by a code you did not create. The predator represents hierarchy, ritual, and violence made meaningful through tradition. It is not chaos. It is order sharpened into brutality. So when the film places humans between them, it places us between two ancient anxieties. On one side is nature without compassion. On the other side is culture without mercy. That is what makes the central conflict more interesting than a simple monster fight. The alien and the predator are not just different designs, they are different philosophies of danger. The alien says survival is everything, the predator says worth must be proven. And humanity caught between them has to ask a quieter question. What kind of intelligence matters when neither force sees us as central? The film's answer is not technology, it is not wealth, it is not even knowledge by itself. The answer is humility joined with courage. Lex does not survive because she becomes the strongest being in the pyramid. She survives because she understands relation. She sees that the predator has rules. She sees that the alien does not. She understands that survival depends on recognizing difference, not pretending every danger is the same. That is a surprisingly mature idea inside a monster crossover. It says wisdom begins when you stop forcing the world into one simple category. The symbols of the film all point back to this. The ice represents buried truth. Something past has been sealed away, preserved beneath a surface that looks blank and lifeless. The pyramid represents hidden history, not history as comfort, but history as a structure built from fear, worship, and repetition. The shifting walls represent reality changing after it is too late to return to certainty. The weapons represent power that only has meaning when you understand the ritual around it. Even the heat signature matters. Warmth beneath ice becomes the image of a sleeping danger, a sign that the past is not cold at all. It is alive. It is only waiting. And this is the part I keep coming back to. Alien vs. Predator is a film about being humbled by scale, not just physical scale, though the pyramid and creatures provide that. Historical scale, theoretical scale, cosmic scale, ritual scale. Human beings enter this story with the confidence of the present, and the film places them inside a conflict that makes the present feel almost tiny. That can be frightening, but it can also be clarifying, because humility is not the same as meaninglessness. The film does not say humans matter because they dominate the universe. It says humans matter when they choose well despite not dominating it. Lex matters not because she is the center of creation, but because she acts with courage after realizing she is not the center. That distinction is important. Modern blockbuster storytelling often makes heroism feel like destiny. Alien vs. Predator makes heroism feel more like earned recognition. Lex is not chosen by prophecy. She is not protected by the story because she is special from the beginning. She becomes significant through behavior. She proves herself under pressure not by becoming inhuman but by remaining clear, brave, and morally awake in a space designed to erase human confidence. So, what is the film really saying? It is saying that some words cannot be conquered, only survived. It is saying that history is not always a treasure waiting to be claimed. It is saying that fear has different languages, and wisdom begins when you learn to tell them apart. It is saying that courage without humility becomes recklessness, but humility without courage becomes surrender. And maybe most of all, it is saying that when we stand before something older, stronger, and stranger than ourselves, the most human thing we can do is not pretend to be gods. It is to understand the rules, protect what life we can, and keep moving toward the light above the ice. To understand Alien vs. Predator as a Paul W.S. Anderson film, you have to understand his attraction to systems, not just worlds. Systems. His films often place human beings inside design spaces where survival depends on learning the rules quickly. A tournament, a haunted ship, a corporate facility, a city built around infection and control, a structure that behaves like a game board. Again and again, Anderson seems drawn to environments that test bodies, compress choices, and turn movement into strategy. That instinct is everywhere in Alien vs. Predator. The pyramid is not only a setting, it is the purest expression of his filmmaking interest, a hostile mechanism with rules older than the characters. People move through it, but they do not command it. They open doors, trigger systems, misread symbols, and slowly realize that the place is not responding to their desires. It has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own purpose. That is very Anderson. He likes spaces that feel constructed around pressure. Corridors, chambers, locked rooms, moving walls, industrial passages, underground labs, arenas. These are not accidental backdrops in his work, they are narrative engines. The characters are forced to adapt because the environment keeps changing the terms of survival. And in Alien vs. Predator, that approach fits the crossover better than it may first appear. Because this film needed a container. If you put the alien and the predator into an ordinary open world, the story can become too wide too quickly. The mythology begins to leak everywhere. But Anderson contains the conflict inside a ritual space. He makes the pyramid a pressure cooker. That choice gives the film structure. It turns a potentially chaotic crossover into a series of tests, thresholds, and confrontations. His signature is also visible in the clean, readable way he stages genre ideas. Anderson is not a filmmaker who hides the basic appeal of a premise. He tends to embrace the directness of it. Mortal Kombat understands the appeal of fighters entering a tournament. Resident Evil understands the appeal of people trapped inside a corporate nightmare. Alien vs. Predator understands the appeal of two iconic creatures finally sharing a fame. There is something honest about that. He does not treat the concept as something to be embarrassed by. He does not disguise the monster movie pleasure under false seriousness. The film may reach for history and atmosphere, but it also knows exactly what title it has. It knows people have come to see the collision. And Anderson builds toward that collision with the straightforward confidence of someone who believes genre cinema can be enjoyed on its own terms. At the same time, his limits are visible too. Anderson's filmmaking is often strongest in architecture, pacing, physical design, and concept. It is sometimes weaker in deep interior characterization. That pattern appears clearly here. The pyramid feels considered. The mythology has shape. The creature conflict has structure. But the human characters outside Lexan Wayland often feel like pieces moving through the machine rather than souls fully opened by it. That is not an accident of this film alone. It connects to a broader tendency in his work. He often builds worlds where character is expressed through action, survival, and function more than through emotional confession. For some stories, that can create efficient momentum. For others, it can leave the heart underdeveloped. Alien vs. Predator sits between those outcomes. It moves. It moves that delivers atmosphere. But you can feel where a more patient, emotional filmmaker might have deepened the human cost. Still, this film teaches us something important about how Anderson sees cinema. He sees cinema as motion through danger. He is interested in bodies under pressure, people crossing thresholds, teams entering sealed environments, and systems revealing themselves one rule at a time. His camera often follows the logic of survival. Where is the exit? Where is the threat? What changed in the room? What weapon matters now? Who understands the system first? That is why Lex becomes the most natural Anderson hero in the film. She is not defined by long monologues. She is defined by practical intelligence under pressure. She observes, adapts, and keeps moving. In Anderson's words, survival often belongs to the person who learns the structure fastest. Alien vs. Predator is not his most emotionally complete work, and it is not his most stylish in a purely visual sense, but it may be one of the clearest examples of his instincts as a genre filmmaker. He takes a wild premise and gives it a playable shape. He turns mythology into architecture. He turns franchise memory into a series of physical tests. And whether you love that approach or feel frustrated by it, the signature is unmistakable. This is a film made by someone who looks at monsters and asks not only what they are, but what kind of arena would make their conflict legible. A temple, a maze, a machine beneath the ice. A place where survival is not only courage but pattern recognition. What changes when you rewatch Alien vs. Predator is that the mystery becomes less important than the mechanism. The first time through, the film invites you to follow discovery. What is beneath the ice? Who builds the pyramid? Why is it there? How do these two creature mythologies connect? Those questions carry the early experience, but on rewatch, because you already know the answers, your attention shifts. You begin watching the structure of the trap itself, and that makes the pyramid more interesting. The early scenes feel different when you already understand that the expedition is not entering a ruin but a ritual chamber waiting to be activated. The heat signature is no longer just a strange signal, it becomes bait. The tunnel is no longer just an entrance, it becomes a path, prepared for sacrifice. The team's excitement no longer feels like adventure alone, it feels like people mistaking a door for an invitation. That is one of the quiet pleasures of the rewatch. When becomes a story about misreading. Everyone is reading the situation incorrectly at first. Wayland reads it as legacy, the scientists read it as proof. The arm team reads it as a mission. Sebastian reads it as history. Lex, more than anyone else, reads it as danger, but even she does not yet understand the full shape of that danger. On rewatch, you can see how each person brings their own desire into the pyramid and how the pyramid slowly destroys those desires one by one. That is stronger than it first appears, because the film's emotional clues are not subtle in a delicate drama sense, but they are functional in a mythic sense. Wayland's need to matter becomes sadder when you know how little the hidden world cares about his ambition, his wealth, his planning, his urgency. All of it seems smaller the second time. You see a man trying to place his name beside history, while history is already preparing to erase him. Lex gains power on rewatch because her caution feels more earned from the beginning. The first time, she can seem like the necessary voice of reason in a genre setup. The second time, she feels like the only person emotionally aligned with the truth of the environment. She respects danger before she understands the mythology. That is why she survives. Not because the film randomly chooses her, but because her way of moving through the world is the only one that can adapt once the truth arrives. The predator scenes also change once you know the ritual context. Their arrival feels less like invasion and more like return. The hunters are not discovering the pyramid, they are coming back to a place already encoded into their culture. Their movement has a confidence the humans lack. They know what the structure is for, even if they underestimate how quickly the situation can escape their control. And that is the rewatch detail that becomes most interesting. The predators are not fully in control either. The first time, it is easy to see them as the dominant force. They have the weapons, the knowledge, the purpose, the ritual. But once the alien threat begins spreading, the film reveals that tradition can become arrogance too. The predators know the rules of the hunt, but they still participate in a system that depends on containing something almost impossible to control. Their confidence is different from human confidence, but it is still confidence that gives the film a sharper thematic pattern on rewatch. Humans trust discovery, predators trust ritual, aliens trust nothing. They simply survive. The fin becomes a triangle of false certainty. Every intelligent species believes it understands the situation, except the one species that does not need understanding at all. The alien does not misread the pyramid because it does not read it symbolically. It uses space, it adapts, it turns every chamber into advantage. That makes the creature feel more dangerous the second time because you stop watching it as an obstacle in the plot and start watching it as the one force that cannot be fully ritualized. Some moments lose surprise on rewatch, especially the major creature reveals and the rhythm of the later action. The film is built around anticipation, and once you know when certain confrontations arrive, the suspense softens, but other things gain texture. The shifting walls become more meaningful, the cart history becomes more tragic. Lex's alliance with the Predator feels less like a sudden twist and more like the only possible survival logic inside a world divided between code and chaos. The film also becomes more visually enjoyable when you stop asking it to become the perfect version in your head. That may be the key. On first viewing, Alien vs. Predator carries the burden of expectation. On rewatch, the burden is lighter. You can see the film that exists rather than the film you imagined. You notice the cold atmosphere, the practical sets, the strong silhouettes, the clean mythic premise, the strange beauty of a buried temple built for monsters. Does it gain power on rewatch? In some ways, yes. Not because the characters suddenly become deeper than they are, and not because every flaw disappears. The thinness remains, the rushed mythology remains, the rest remains, but the structure becomes clearer. The film is easier to appreciate as a compact monster ritual, a dark adventure beneath the ice, a story about human ambition walking into a machine older than human memory. And here is what I keep returning to, rewatching Alien vs. Predator teaches you that some films survive not because they are flawless, but because they contain an image, a mood, or a mythic idea that keeps calling you back. For this film, that idea is simple: a pyramid under the ice, a hunt older than history, and a survivor learning too late and just in time that the only way out is to understand the monsters differently. The cinema before Alien vs. Predator is not one road, it is several roads meeting in the dark. The most obvious ancestors are Alien and Predator, but even those two films come from different traditions. Alien grew from haunted house cinema, body horror, industrial science fiction, and the fear of being trapped with something you cannot understand. Predator grew from action cinema, war films, survival, thrillers, and the ancient myth of the hunter becoming hunted. One begins with vulnerability inside a machine. The other begins with strength being stripped down in nature. That difference matters because Alien vs. Predator is not simply combining monsters, it is combining cinematic instincts. From Alien, this film inherits the corridor, the sealed environment, the creature glimpsed in parts. The idea that architecture can become fear, the original Alien made space feel less like wonder and more like isolation. It turned the future into matter, shadow, machinery, and breath. Alien vs. Predator cannot recreate that same level of dread, but you can feel the inheritance in the pyramid's enclosed passages. The characters move through darkness the way people once moved through the Nostromo, not fully knowing whether the space around them is empty. From Aliens, it inherits the group dynamic, the military energy, the sense of a team entering danger with equipment and confidence before realizing the enemy does not respect that confidence. The armed members of the expedition are not colonial Marines, but they carry a similar illusion that weapons and training can impose order on a nightmare. And as in Aliens, that illusion breaks when the creature turns the environment into its own territory. From Predator, it inherits the ritual of being watched. The original Predator is powerful because the jungle slowly becomes an eye. Before the creature is fully visible, you feel observation. Human strength is being studied. Human arrogance is being measured. Alien vs. Predator carries that forward to the hunter's arrival in Antarctica. The predators do not simply attack, they assess, they move with purpose. They treat violence as a test, not merely an appetite. But this film also inherits from older adventure cinema. There is a strong trace of Lost World storytelling here. The journey into a hidden place, the discovery of a structure that rewrites history, the feeling that modern people have stumbled into an ancient secret. You can feel echoes of expedition films, archaeological thrillers, and temple mysteries where the past is not passive but dangerous. The pyramid belongs to that lineage. It is the forbidden chamber, the cursed ruin, the sacred place turned survivor trap, and then there is the influence of ancient astronaut mythology. That strange bulb idea that human civilization may have been touched or shaped by visitors from beyond Earth. Alien vs. Predator uses that idea not to create wonder, but to create unease. It asks what happens if the beings behind ancient worship were not benevolent teachers, but hunters. What if the gods were not guides? What if they were predators wearing masks? The question gives the film its darker, mythic flavor. You can also feel the shadow of creature feature cinema. The joy of monsters meeting monsters is older than this franchise. Cinema has long loved the collision of icons, not always because the stories are elegant, but because the image is irresistible. One monster defines a fear, another monster defines a different fear. Put them together, and the screen becomes a mythological argument. Which fear is stronger? Which form of danger survives the other? Alien vs. Predator joins the tradition, but with a modern franchise consciousness. It is not just a monster fight. It is a brand collision, a fan culture event, a translation of comics and games into live-action cinema. That makes it different from older creature battles. The fan is aware that the audience already has history with both sides. Every mask, claw, jaw, tail, and sound arrives carrying memory. What does Alien vs. Predator say that those earlier films did not? It says that monsters can become mythology through repetition. Alien and Predator each began as singular nightmares. Over time, they became species, cultures, symbols, icons. Alien vs. Predator takes that transformation and makes it literal. The creatures are no longer isolated incidents. They are part of an ancient system. The predator is no longer only one hunter in the jungle. The alien is no longer only one terror aboard a ship. Both become elements in a cycle older than the human characters can imagine. That is both the film's strength and its danger, because the more mythology you build around the monster, the more you risk softening its mystery. But you also gain a different kind of power, the power of legend. Alien versus Predator chooses legend over purity. It chooses the temple over the haunted room, the ritual over the accident, the ancient cycle over the isolated nightmare. And even if the earlier films are stronger works of cinema, this film remains interesting because it shows what happens when horror icons become cultural architecture. They stop belonging to one story, they become gods beneath the ice. From this moment, we go into full spoilers. If you have not yet seen this film, stop here, go experience it first, and come back. Some things deserve to be felt before they are understood. What the film reveals, once we step fully into its final shape, is that the pyramid beneath Antarctica is not simply a hidden structure, it is a shriek, a place built for repetition, a place where the predators return every 100 years to prove themselves against the deadliest creature they know how to breed, contain, and hunt. The humans do not discover a mystery, they interrupt a ceremony. That is the first major twist the film asks us to absorb. The pyramid is not abandoned, it is waiting. The ancient human worshippers did not build their faith around gods in the gentle sense. They built it around beings who came from the sky, taught them to construct temples, and demanded human bodies as part of a ritual process. The predators were not saviors. They were not demons either. They were hunters so powerful that early humanity translated fear into worship, and that idea darkens the whole film. Because once Sebastian understands the carvings, the expedition's purpose collapses. The team has not found a discovery that belongs in a museum. They have found evidence of humanity being used as part of a much older design. The pyramid is a religious site, yes, but also a breeding ground, a battlefield, a training chamber, a machine that turns human curiosity into fuel for a hunt. Then the real horror of the situation becomes clear. The alien queen is alive below the pyramid, chained and preserved as the source of the creatures the predators need for their trial. She is not a random monster awakened by accident. She is part of the system, a living engine of terror, kept in darkness until the ritual requires her again. That is one of the film's strongest mythological choices. The queen becomes less like an animal in a cage and more like an ancient disaster being restarted. The predators believe they can control her. They believe ritual can contain biology. They believe tradition can hold back chaos because it has done so before. But the film's deeper warning is that no system built on controlled horror stays controlled forever. Once the aliens begin spreading through the pyramid, the trial becomes something much more dangerous than the young predators expected. The hunters arrive with confidence, weapons, and ceremonial purpose, but the aliens do not respect ceremony. They do not understand tradition. They do not care that this is the rite of passage. They exist only to survive, reproduce, adapt, and turn every enclosed space into an extension of themselves. That is where the predator confidence begins to crack. The young hunters are not invincible legends here. They are initiates. That changes the way their defeats feel. They are powerful, yes, but they are also being tested, and some of them are not ready. One falls because ritual confidence meets biological speed. Another is overwhelmed because the pyramid's game has become more unstable than expected. The film uses those deaths to remind us that the predator code may be ancient, but it is not magic. Honor does not make you safe. Meanwhile, the humans are being reduced from expedition members into survivors. Their weapons do not matter enough. Their knowledge comes too late. Their plans are constantly broken by walls, creatures, and revelations. The pyramid takes the group apart piece by piece, and every death pushes Lex closer to the truth she has been moving toward from the beginning. Escape will not come through domination. It will come through understanding which danger can be read. Sebastian's fate is one of the film's quieter emotional losses. He begins as the one who can translate the ancient record, the one who turns symbols into meaning, but knowledge does not spare him. In this world, understanding the past is not the same as escaping it. His role becomes tragic because he discovers the rules just as those rules close around him. He helps Lex see the shape of the ritual, but he cannot step outside the consequences himself. Wayland's final confrontation with the Predator also matters more than it may first appear. He is physically weakened, fully aware that he cannot survive in the same way the others might, but he still tries to buy time. In that moment, his ambition becomes something more human. Earlier, he wanted legacy through discovery. Near the end, he finds a smaller, better kind of meaning, not in owning history, but in giving someone else a chance to live. The Predator's response is important too. At first, Wayland is not considered worthy prey because of his condition. That tells us something cold about the Predator code. It does not attack simply because a body is nearby. It judges. It measures threat. It decides whether the hunt has meaning. But when Wayland chooses resistance, however limited, the Predator recognizes the act. The scene is harsh but thematically clear. In Predator culture, worth is not about human morality. It is about challenge. Then Lex and the last surviving Predator, Scar, move into the film's defining relationship. The alliance between them is the moment where Alien versus Predator becomes fully itself. It is also the moment that divides people. Some see it as the film's most exciting mythological turn. Others feel it happens too quickly. Both reactions make sense. But emotionally, the alliance works because it is not built on friendship. It is built on recognition. Lex proves herself by surviving, by helping, by understanding the hierarchy of danger. Scar does not suddenly become gentle. He does not become human. He remains a hunter shaped by a brutal code. But that code has room for respect. And Lex, through courage and clarity, earns a place inside that respect. That is what makes the alliance interesting. It is not sentimental. It is practical, symbolic, and ritualistic. Scar marks her not as a beloved companion, but as someone who has passed through the fire of the hunt and come out changed. The mark is painful, but it is also acknowledgement. In the logic of this world, Lex has crossed a boundary. She is no longer only prey. The final escape turns the pyramids into a tomb. As the ritual collapses and the alien threat spreads beyond containment, destruction becomes the only possible cleansing. The idea is simple but effective. If this place cannot be controlled, it must be buried again, even if burying it means accepting that some histories are too dangerous to preserve. That is an important reversal. At the beginning, the characters wanted to uncover the hidden world. At the end, survival depends on closing it. The film's final battle with the alien queen brings the story back to scale. After all the corridors and chambers, the queen emerges as the living heart of the nightmare, no longer chained, no longer contained, no longer part of anyone's ritual. She is the consequence the predators believed they could manage. She is the past breaking its restraints. And when Lex and Scar face her together, the conflict becomes the whole film compressed into one image: human courage, predator code, and alien chaos colliding at the edge of the frozen world. Scar's death gives the ending its strange emotional weight. He survives the pyramid, survives the hunt, earns victory, and then falls because the alien life cycle has already moved through him. It is a cruel final reminder that the alien does not need to win a fight in the obvious way. It wins by leaving something behind. Its horror is not only attack, it is continuation. When the predator ship arrives, the film briefly widens into mythology again. The elder predator recognizes Lex not as an equal in a human emotional sense, but as someone who has survived the trial and earned the mark of respect. He gives her a weapon, and that gesture matters. It is one of the film's clearest symbolic moments. Lex entered the pyramid as an outsider to the ritual. She leaves as the only living being who truly passed through it. That ending means more than simple survival. Lex has not conquered the monsters. She has not solved the ancient system. She has not made the world safe. But she has learned a difference between arrogance and courage. She has survived by refusing to treat the unknown as something to possess. And in that final image of her standing alone in the Antarctic cold, holding the weapon of a culture that nearly destroyed her, the fin finds a quiet, pulpy kind of poetry. The sting at the end changes everything. Scar's body is taken onto the predator ship, and from him emerges a hybrid creature, part alien, part predator. The implication is terrifying because it means the entire ritual has produced something even the predators may not fully understand. Their victory is infected. Their ship, their culture, their confidence, their code, all of it now carries the seed of chaos within it. That final creature is not just a sequel tease, it is the film's thesis in monster form. The predators believed they could ritualize the alien. They believed they could turn nightmare into test. But the alien cannot be fully absorbed into someone else's culture. It transforms what contains it, it takes the shape of its host, and returns as a new threat. That is what makes the ending effective even if you know where franchise history goes later. The final image says that control was always an illusion. The hunt may end, but biology continues, and that connects all the way back to the beginning. The humans thought discovery meant ownership. The predators thought ritual meant control. Both were wrong in different ways. The pyramid beneath the ice was not a treasure and not a safe arena. It was a reminder that some forces survived every system built around them. My emotional reaction to the ending is mixed but honest. Part of me wishes the film had given Lex and Scar more time, more silence, more gradual trust. Part of me wishes the Queen's escape felt more horrific, more overwhelming, more impossible. But another part of me still feels the strength of that final mythic arrangement, the lone human survivor, the dead hunter, the departing ship, the creature inside the victory. That is the strange power of Alien versus Predator. It ends not with peace but with contamination, not with answers but with a warning. Under the ice, humanity found a secret history. In the pyramid, the predators completed a broken ritual, but inside the body of the hunter, the alien wrote the final sentence. And that sentence says, the nightmare was never contained. What Alien versus Predator leaves behind in me is not a perfect scene, or a perfect character arc, or even the clean satisfaction of two legendary creatures meeting exactly the way imagination once promised. What it leaves behind is an image, a woman standing in the white emptiness after surviving something buried, ancient and inhuman. Behind her is a world that almost swallowed her. Above her is a sky that feels too quiet after everything beneath the ice. In her hands is proof that the impossible happened, not proof for science, not proof for science, not proof for history, proof for the body, proof carried in breath, exhaustion, memory, and silence. That image stays with me because it understands something simple about survival. Sometimes survival does not feel victorious, sometimes it feels stunned. You come out of the dark and the world is still there, but you are not exactly the same person who entered it. The air has changed, the light has changed, or maybe the light is the same and you are the thing that changed. Lex leaves the pyramid alive, but not untouched. That distinction matters. She does not walk away as someone who conquered the unknown. She walks away as someone who was forced to understand how small human certainty can be. And strangely, that gives her survival more dignity. She is not rewarded because she was invincible. She survives because she remained awake inside a nightmare that kept changing shape. Here is what I keep returning to. The film's strongest emotional residue is humility, not fear, exactly. Not triumph, humility, the kind that arrives when you realize the world is older, stranger, and less obedient than you thought. The kind that comes when history stops looking like a museum and starts looking like a locked door with claw marks on the other side. Alien versus calm. Predator may be a creature crossover, but at its most lingering, it is about the feeling of being corrected by skill. That is the feeling I think many people understand, even far away from monsters and pyramids. We all enter certain moments believing we know the shape of our lives. We think we know what a situation is, what role we play in it, what tools will help us, what knowledge will protect us. And then something happens that reveals a larger system around us. Suddenly, confidence is not enough. Plans are not enough. The only thing that matters is whether we can adapt without losing ourselves. That is why Lex becomes the part of the film I carry most. Not because she is written with endless psychological detail, but because her presence has a clean emotional truth. She is careful in a story driven by recklessness. She respects danger in a story where others mistake danger for opportunity. She survives because she is willing to learn from what frightens her. There is something quietly beautiful in that. She does not defeat the myth by becoming bigger than it. She survives by becoming more honest inside it. And maybe that is why I return to this film with more affection than its reputation might suggest. I know its flaws. I can feel the missed depths, the rushed mythology, the characters who should have carried more weight, the horror that could have been darker, the silence that could have been longer. But I also feel the pull of its central dream, the pyramid beneath the ice, the ritual no one was meant to interrupt, the monsters as ancient symbols, the human survivor standing between two different definitions of fear. Some films stay with you because they are complete, others stay with you because they contain a doorway. Alien vs. Predator is the second kind. It opens a doorway into a larger imagined mythology, and even when the movie itself does not walk through every corridor, you can still feel them extending beyond the frame. You can imagine older hands, failed rituals, abandoned temples, civilizations trying to turn terror into worship, predators carrying scars from trials we never see, aliens turning sacred spaces into nests. The movie gives you enough to wonder, and wonder, even in an imperfect film, is not nothing. Would I return to it? Yes, but not in the way I return to Alien or Predator. I do not return to Alien vs. Predator for pure dread, or for flawless tension, or for the deepest emotional writing in either franchise. I return to it for mood, for the cold, for the stone, for the collation of symbols, for the strange satisfaction of seeing two nightmares placed inside one ritual chamber and watching a human being survive by understanding that not all monsters speak the same language. The person who will carry this film with them is probably someone who loves genre cinema not only when it is refined, but when it is ambitious in strange, will be mythic ways. Someone who can see the rough edges and still feel the atmosphere. Someone who understands that a flawed monster movie can still contain a powerful idea. Someone who remembers that cinema is not only about perfection, but about images that refuse to leave. For me, that image is still there. A frozen word, a buried history, a survivor marked by the impossible, and somewhere beyond the sky a nightmare carried quietly into the future. So where does that leave Alien vs. Predator? For me, it leaves the film in a very specific place, not among the masterpieces of either franchise, and not among the empty crossovers that exist only because the title sounds profitable. It lives somewhere stranger than that. It is a flawed creature film with a genuinely strong mythic imagination, a film that sometimes rushes past its own best ideas, but still gives those ideas enough shape to remain memorable. The complete experience is uneven but never meaningless. If you come to Alien vs. Predator hoping for the aching dread of Alien, you may feel the absence immediately. That older film breathed fear slowly into every corridor. It made silence feel infected. It made the unknown sacred. Alien vs. Predator is too direct for that kind of terror. It wants movement sooner. It wants the arena. It wants the crossover promise fulfilled. And if you come hoping for the raw muscular suspense of Predator, you may also feel something missing. The original Predator had the purity of a nightmare stripped to its bones, trained men in a jungle, being watched by something they cannot see until it is almost too late. Alien vs. Predator is more elaborate, more mythological, more constructed. It trades primal simplicity for franchise architecture. But if you meet it on its own terms, there is still a real pleasure here. This is a film for people who love genre mythology. People who love ancient temples, hidden histories, impossible discoveries, creature design, survival logic, ritual combat, and the pulpy beauty of monsters being treated like legends. It is for the kind of viewer who can look at a pyramid beneath Antarctica and not ask only whether it is realistic, but what it feels like as an image, what it awakens. what kind of childhood cinematic electricity it still carries, who may not connect with it, anyone who needs rich human drama at the center, anyone who wants the alien to remain almost unknowable, anyone who wants the predator to stay mysterious rather than culturally explained. And that is fair. Some monsters become powerful because we understand less. Alien versus Predator chooses to understand more, and that choice gives the film both its identity and its weakness. Would I call it ascension cinema? Not exactly. Would I call it disposable? No. It is the kind of film that belongs to late night rewatching, to franchise marathons, to rainy weekends, to the part of you that still remembers the joy of seeing impossible concepts made visible. It is not the movie to show someone as the deepest expression of either franchise, but it may be the movie to show someone who wants to feel the strange thrill of two mythologies crossing in the dark. For streaming, it works beautifully. For a collector who loves these words, it is worth owning as part of the larger creature cinema conversion, not because it completes Alien or Predator perfectly, but because it reveals what happens when icons become flexible enough to survive outside the original fear. My rating is 6.1 out of 10. And the sentence that earns that rating is this: Alien vs. Predator is not a great film, but it is a memorable mythic chamber. Cold, flawed, watchable, and built around an idea strong enough to keep breathing beneath the ice. Somewhere under all its compromises, there is still that image, a door below the world, a hunt older than history, and one survivor walking back into the cold, carrying proof that the dark was real. And if you stayed with me all the way to the end of this descent, thank you. Truly. Films like Alien vs. Predator are interesting because they ask us to hold more than one feeling at the same time. We can see the flaws, we can name the missed opportunities, we can wish the film had gone darker, deeper, slower, stranger, and still we can admit that something in it remains alive. Something in its atmosphere still calls from beneath the surface. That is why I love talking about cinema this way. Not just to decide whether a film is good or bad, but to understand why certain images remain with us even when the whole film does not reach perfection. Sometimes the most interesting conversations come from the films that almost became something greater, the films where you can feel the stronger version hiding in the wars. If this essay gave you a new way to look at Alien vs. Predator, then leave a like, stay close to the Cineflux, and subscribe for more cinematic essays that move through film with patience, curiosity, and feeling. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Alien vs. Predator deserves more respect than it usually gets? Did the Lex and Predator alliance work for you, or did it happen too quickly? And if you could remake this crossover today, would you make it darker, bigger, slower, or more faithful to the comics? Next time we will step into another film where image, memory, and meaning collide. Another story asking to be seen not just as entertainment but as cinema. Until then, keep watching closely, keep feeling deeply, and never underestimate the strange life of an imperfect film. That is the Cineflux. I will see you in the next one.